Brevard County Commissioner Curt Smith won re-election in November after a bitter GOP primary. He will now serve 4 more years on the commission. One of his top goals is to clean up the Indian River Lagoon. Welcome to I Am Brevard. I'm Isadora Rangel. During my conversation with Smith, he defended the use of economic incentives to attract companies to the Space Coast, and he also said the county should expand its bus system. Watch. Commissioner Smith, welcome on the show again.
Pleasure to be here.
And congratulations on winning re-election, of course. And I want to start our conversation just looking back on the elections. You won a primary election as well as the general in November. I think you arguably had the toughest election in Brevard County. I don't know if you agree with me. You had a very close contest with a former Commissioner Trudy Infantini in the primary. Can you talk about that experience in running such a campaign in an election that a lot of times was quite negative, with outside forces jumping in to try to get you defeated?
Well, it wasn't pleasant. You know, I just felt like I had a good record to run on, and I did. And I think the other side felt like the only way they could beat me was to try and distort that record somehow. And quite frankly, lie about it and drum up things and conjure up things and make up things and see if any of them stuck, and try and sway the voters away from voting for this guy. But I think, you know, when it came down to it, people looked at, I think voters looked at the people that voted for me and supported me and endorsed me, like Sheriff Ivey, and who's a real pillar in the community, and Phil Archer, who's the state attorney, who's a pillar in the community. And if those guys are supporting me, he can't be corrupt, and he can't be all these other things that they were trying to claim that I was. So I think truth won out, and I think that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think a lot of voters were tired of politics this election season. How do you feel about that? I mean, you were a businessman before you ran for the county commission. Does it ever cross your mind, like,
oh, yeah,
why am I doing this?
Oh, absolutely. Had I known 4 years ago that I would have to endure what I did this time, and my family would have to go through that, I wouldn't have done it the first time. You know, and people the first time said that things can get negative, but I had no idea. I just had no idea, because the first time I ran against, there were 11 of us at one point, or 12, and I think 6 or 7 of us qualified for the primary, so there were 7. But none of us did any of that. You know, we just went out there and talked to the public about who we were and what we wanted to do, et cetera. And this time it was just so negative, and I thought, gosh, what have we devolved to in this country, that negativism is so effective? And somebody explained it to me, and I think it's quite apropos. If you go to breakfast and you had a great breakfast, if I told you I had breakfast at XYZ Diner today and it was really, really good, probably in 10 minutes you wouldn't remember what I said. You would remember that I said I had a good breakfast, but you wouldn't remember much beyond that. But if I said I went to XYZ Diner and there was a cockroach in my egg, you would not remember weeks from now, and you would have told hundreds of people about it. So negativity works. And I think the other reason it works, and this is just pure conjecture on my part, but I think it works because voters have become lazy. They don't pay attention to who the candidates are or what they're about. That's why I think it would be a great idea to get rid of the R and the D behind the candidate's name, because for a lot of people, that's the deciding reason. And quite frankly, I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative, but there's some Republicans that I know that I wouldn't vote for. And so I really need to know about the people. And I think the votership needs to know what that is. And if they weren't given on a plate that they're this or they're that, then they would start paying attention, and then they would have to be less lazy. And I think that negative campaigning would be far less effective, because people would be doing their homework.
So do you think that county commission races should be nonpartisan like the school board races are?
I don't know. I'll let smarter people than me make that decision.
And you just finished your 4th year on the commission, and you were recently sworn in. You're going into your 5th year. You have 4 more years on the commission. I want to know, what are the top 3 things that you want to accomplish before you end your 2 terms? Well,
I think it'll probably be the same 3 I started with, and I don't know that I'll complete them then. But a big thing is roads. Roads were in terrible shape when I took office. They're much better now. I've said it numerous times during the campaign when we have 1,100 miles of roads in the county. And most people don't even know that. And if they did, they don't conceive how much that is. If you got on 95 out here and drove north for 1,100 miles, you'd be in Connecticut. That's how many county roads that we're responsible for. And that doesn't include state roads and city roads and federal roads. That's just county maintained roads. So 1,100 miles of roads, and the ongoing thought process is that maintenance makes all the difference in the world for the longevity of
it's a lot more expensive to repair a failing road.
Exactly.
Right?
So we should be repaving about 50 miles of roads a year, and that would get us to 1,100 miles every 20 years. We've only been doing 8 to 12 miles because of the downturn. And as I tell people, roads aren't sexy. So it's easy to cut roads, and that's what the previous commissions did from 08 to when I took office, 14. And I think in 14, when I first took office, we had only done 10 or 12. And the next year, it was 10 or 12. And I kept hearing, well, there's no money, there's no money. We have to raise a gas tax, we have to raise a gas tax. And I sat down with Stockton Whitten, who was the county manager at the time, and we came up with the money to do over 50 miles of roads. I think we did 57 miles without raising a gas tax. And now that the boom has started, and we've got more people moving in and more money being raised, we're going to continue to do in the 60-mile range. If that's enough to catch up to the backlog, I don't know yet, but so that's number one.
What is the current backlog? I mean, I kind of
Well, it depends on who you ask. It's anywhere from $100 to $300 million.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
And my question is, I know that's a very difficult discussion to have, but can the county really clear that backlog without increasing its tax base? Whether it's a gas tax or a property tax hike, is that feasible? So
that's a good question, and I'm not sure. So that's something we're gonna really dive into in the next year or two. And then the second thing was, for me, was the economy, jobs, bringing businesses in, because businesses bring jobs and jobs create wealth, and people feel better about themselves when they've got an income and they can live the American dream. So that was important, and I think the number is like, we've brought in something like 3,500, 20, how many jobs have we brought in? About 2,300 jobs with about 3,500 employees since I've been in office. And that's a big deal. And you get like Walmart just opened up their their processing business up here in Cocoa. And they're employing, I think their salaries are something like $49 million a year, and Blue Origin's going to bring $32 million a year. So that's a big deal. And then the third thing, go ahead.
I'm sorry, well, when you say the county has brought jobs, how has the county accomplished that? Because a lot of people will argue that the market takes care of itself when it comes to those matters.
Well, yeah, it does over time, but it doesn't accelerate it like you can do when you have incentives. And I know I get a lot of pushback from people about incentives, but you have to have incentives because if you don't, the playing field is stacked against you. And one example is we got Blue Origin here to build their rockets. That's a big deal for us. Of all the thousands of rockets that have been built launched in this county over the last 60, 70 years, not one has ever been built here. So Blue Origin building their rocket is a real game changer. People kept saying, well, they would have come here anyway. It cost us $8 million to bring them here. But they're going to give us $32 million a year in salaries in return. So the return on investment is huge. Not to mention it puts us on the map as a rocket builder. So to put to rest the idea that they would have come here anyway, and that's often the argument that you're saying, that the market takes care of itself. When they were looking for a place for their rocket assembly engine, their rocket engine assembly production plant, they looked here, but you know where they went? Well, first of all, we weren't even in the conversation because we couldn't give them any money. So they were going to go to Greenville, South Carolina, that offered them $17 million. But they wound up in Huntsville that offered them $35 million in incentives. That's the problem we have. It's an incentive-driven deal. But you have to have the atmosphere, too, for businesses to want to be here, and we've created that. We're business-friendly. We're not telling people, you know, you can come if you want, but we don't really care.
And I mean, we see that with Amazon. They got incentives, and the newly elected Congresswoman from New York completely bashed that decision. So it's interesting how that issue is very nonpartisan, that you have people from both parties who can be for and against it. But I want to hear, I think you were moving on to another point.
Indian River Lagoon is the biggest one for me. It was and is. That's one of the primary reasons I ran the first time. There were many, but that was the primary reason, because I've been here since 1986, and the Indian River was pretty good then. And I can remember sitting on my dock. I bought a property on the water in '88. I can remember sitting on my dock sometime in the early '90s and said to the people that were with me, boy, I hope this river never goes downhill. I hope the time never comes that I will say to my grandkids, well, I can remember when we saw dolphins and manatees. And I didn't even have grandkids yet. But I knew that the possibility existed. And we had done an awful lot in the county with cleaning up, taking the sewer outfalls away from the river, and everybody thought that was going to be the cure-all. And then in the early 2000s, there was study after study after study, and so we got to 2010 or 12. The river was definitely going downhill. We had done study after study after study, and I said, you know, I want to run for office because the time for studies are over. We need to start doing something about it. So I ran for office. I won. I became part of Robin Fisher, who was chairman at the time. I asked him to appoint me to the newly formed Indian River Lagoon Council. In fact, it hadn't even been formed yet, but they were forming it, so I was one of the first members to be appointed. And I've been there ever since. I've been the vice chair and the chair of that. I've traveled to D.C. many times to talk with our Army Corps of Engineers and our senators and our congressmen about cleaning up the river, and I brought back some monies and some fast permitting projects. And so, yeah, the lagoon's really, really big.
And obviously, the voters in 2016 approved a sales tax to clean up the lagoon, but there is ongoing debate whether the county should be spending money outside of the sales tax proceeds. And I think the most contentious debate has been whether to use money from the tourism development tax, which is better known as the hotel bed taxes. Some of your fellow commissioners think that that money, which traditionally has gone into attracting more tourists to the area, should go into fixing our sewer infrastructure. Where do you stand on that debate today?
Well, there's a couple things. You have to understand that the sewer infrastructure is an enterprise.
Yeah, just it funds itself.
Right, just like FPL. So you can have that argument that we can spend more money on sewer and water and the lagoon and where it goes. The tourists bring the tourist taxes here. The Cocoa Beach and Melbourne Beach and the other places where we have hotels and rental units, they bring in the tourist tax. Should they continue to spend money to try and attract tourists? Well, of course they should, because tourism's probably our biggest industry. And so then you get into the question, well, if you're going to put money aside to something else, how much of it should you take? And so that's always going to be an ongoing debate. How do I stand on it? I'm kind of straddling the two sides. If you're going to take some money from tourists, let's put it into the Indian River Lagoon. And the sewer will take care of itself, because that's what they're charged with. When that enterprise has to maintain and expand as needed. So that'll take care of itself over time, but the Indian River won't. So we need to do what we can to fix the Indian River.
And how about the state? And we just ran an editorial about this. Back when the sales tax was passed, there was sort of this understanding that the state was going to step in with some matching funds. It turns out that it seems that Tallahassee saw that we passed the sales tax, and now they think, you know, Brevard has taken care of this issue. But, you know, every expert will say we need more money than what's coming from the sales tax. I mean, how can Brevard County convince the legislature and the incoming governor, Ron DeSantis, to invest more dollars? And does that rest on the county commission or a delegation, or are we just not working well with each other? What's going on here?
I think you need to ask our legislators. You know, we have Brevard County legislators that are in Tallahassee, and they're the ones that are supposed to be helping us and helping the Indian River Lagoon. And, you know, so I think they're on the hot seat, and, you know, they like to, at least one of them likes to point fingers elsewhere, but, you know, the fact is... Are you
referring to Representative Randy Fine?
Yes. He's quick to point fingers at people, but what has he done? You know, he's been up there for 2 years now, or however long it's been, and he says we should do this, we should do that. Well, what is he doing? That's another story. But that's really the bottom line. The legislators are the ones that are in Tallahassee. They're the ones that make policy. And yes, you're absolutely correct, because when Jim Barfield, the other commissioner, and myself were attending these town hall meetings back in 2016, making people aware of the choice that they were going to have to make regarding a sales tax, I was encouraged by folks from the DEP and the EPA and even the governor's office themselves. Absolutely, you'll get matching funds. You'll be eligible for matching funds. And you're right. After we did it, and all these other counties in the Indian River Lagoon Consortium, the 5 counties that consist of the Indian River Lagoon Council, they haven't done it. They've tried and they failed. And the attitude seems to be, well, Brevard can take care of itself. Well, that's not fair. And it's a big, long, 156-mile long river, and it needs more help than we can do. We can do what we can do here in the county. That's one of the things that I've heard too. Well, you're fixing our river. Well, our water is going to go elsewhere, and so it's not really going to help. Well, that's not true, because there is no flow in the river. The river doesn't have a top and a bottom.
And no inlets, except for the Sebastian Inlet,
Right.
which is not even in Brevard technically, right? So going,
yeah, it kind of separates the two.
Yeah. So I want to go back to economic development. One of the issues that I've heard since I've been with Florida Today is a lot of our large employers are desperate for skilled labor, and a lot of them find it hard to attract young professionals to Brevard because they're competing with larger metro areas. How can Brevard become more attractive for these sort of young professionals?
I think that is being handled by the EDC. They've targeted that since I've been in office, and they've worked with the high schools and the junior college to create more programs where skilled technicians or kids can become skilled technicians and be attractive to these companies. For example, just one I can mention, the aerospace, is that what it is, at O'Galley High School? These kids can actually learn how to work on airplanes, and when they graduate, Embraer is hiring them as quick as they come out of high school, and they don't even have to go to college, and they're making a lot of money. And if they want to go to college, I believe I've been told that Embraer is helping them do their studies and do advanced studies right here in Brevard County. So I think that's being addressed. And something along that same line that just stunned me, I think the numbers, there's 579 manufacturers here in Brevard County. And that's a stunning number when you think about it. Because I had no idea until I was told that number, and I visited a number of these manufacturers. And you know, we don't have a huge company that has 500 employees, but we've got an awful lot of companies that have 3 to 30 employees. So we're a manufacturing center. So I think we're doing terrific work in creating the workforce that these companies need.
And you were recently sworn in again, and you also have a new commissioner, Brian Lober, who was elected in District 2, just north of you. What are your expectations for him? He's a young guy. He's in, I believe, his mid-30s. First time you ran for office. What do you think? How do you think it's going to change the Brevard County Commission? It's
hard to say. You know, I spent a good part of the evening with him last night at his reception. He had a reception after the swearing in, and family and friends were there, and I spent a good amount of time talking to him and his dad. And you know, he's a bright guy, and he's going to bring a fresh set of ideas to the table. And like me, he's going to learn that a lot of things that he was told, some are true, some are not true. And so you just have to look at what the county is all about and filter it through your own perspective. And I'm sure he'll do a good job.
One of the things he said he wants to do, and he said that right after the election, was to have term limits for volunteers who serve on county boards. You previously voted against this proposal when it came up recently. Would you vote for it against it again? And
yeah, I think I would, because, well, the reason is we appoint them. We can take them off. We can fire them. So we have the power to give them the position. We have the power to take them out of the position. So we're the term limiter. If I don't want you on my board anymore, I just say, Isadora, I've decided to make a change. I don't have to have term limits to do my job. So yeah, I won't support that. But you know, that's something that he's near and dear to his heart. So he's, if he goes through with it, we'll see how the votes go.
And you also have Commissioner John Tabaya, who was actively campaigning against you.
Gee, you noticed that?
In the primary. And I wrote a column about this. But after you won the primary, he actually wrote a letter to the editor, to Florida Today. I don't know if you read it, congratulating you and saying it's time for us to work together. I want to know if you have sort of mended your relationship with him, and do you see a path for you to work together?
I don't hold grudges, and I never had anything against him. It mystified me how petty some people can be, including during that campaign, but that's water over the dam now as far as I'm concerned. He wrote a nice letter to me after the election, even sent me a $100 check for my campaign, and he donated $100. I was the chairman this year again for the Real Men Wear Pink to raise awareness for breast cancer, and he sent a $100 donation for that as well. So he's doing his part to try and mend fences, and you know, he and I philosophically we're pretty similar, but on some issues we're going to differ, just like I differ with my wife on different issues. So you know, I don't feel like if I differ with somebody that I should hate them, and not everybody in the political business feels that way, but I think that's the way to get things done, because you can't go through life with one idea and with blinders on and thinking your way is the only way.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you have a Republican commission, and you know, that's something you would expect when you have sort of a party balance between Republicans and Democrats. And after I moved here, it was very interesting to see this infighting within Republicans. So it's not as homogenous as people expect. And is that a good thing that you have, you know, dissenting ideas? Because it is sort of a good thing. That's what the founding fathers wanted, but not within the same
dissenting
party.
ideas are, you know, everybody has different perspectives. They bring a different perspective. For example, as you said, Commissioner Lober's in his mid-30s, Commissioner Tabaya is in his early 40s, and I just hit 70. So I was in business for 40 plus years. I've got the perspective of hiring and firing and making business successful, and the perspective of dealing with people for a lot of years. They don't have that, so my perspective is different. So I don't care what party label you assign somebody, perspective changes based on your experiences. Yeah, so I think it's good that you have different ideas and you can hash them out, because you might have an idea that I hadn't thought of before, and initially I might say, you know, that's kind of dumb, but then as I think about it, it makes sense, and so maybe we can hit some kind of middle and compromise and make us both happy. Yeah. I think that's really what you're striving to do.
Yeah, difficult thing to do. I'm in Lead Brevard class of 2019.
Oh, good.
And that's one of the things that we're learning, and it's sort of, you have to train yourself to do those things. But I want to ask you something that I assume you probably don't get asked a lot, which is public transportation. Nobody really thinks about it here in Brevard, and I didn't until Dave Berman, our reporter who covers the county, did a story about a few residents who showed up at a meeting, and some of them, I believe, were visually impaired,
right.
And they were complaining that Brevard does not have enough bus lines for people who cannot drive a car. And do you see that lack of public transportation could potentially become an issue, even though we live in Florida, where, you know, having a car is sort of a requirement a lot of times?
Well, it's an issue for me. I got chastised 2 years ago, I guess, when I voted to bust, quote unquote, the budget cap because of extenuating circumstances. And part of that money went to buses, because we don't have enough bus transportation for people. And yes, I'm a conservative, but I'm not mean-spirited. And these are people that want to be productive. They may be blind, and that is a handicap, but they don't want to sit in the house and have people try and take care of them. They don't have their hand out. They just want a hand up, and the transportation is the way that they can get back and forth to work. And these people, they're blind, but they're quite capable of having a real life, and they can go out there and be productive citizens. So I think that one of the charges we have as a government is to help people be productive citizens. I don't think it's our place to just tell people, well, you're not like us, quote unquote, so you have to go to the back of the line.
And do we have the money to add more bus lines? Because my understanding is you can wait for the bus for 2 hours, and our county is long, so it takes you a couple of hours just to get from one end to the other.
You're right, and the people that at that meeting you're talking about expressed that, because if they were coming from, say, the northern part of the county and they wanted to get to a job in the southern part or the middle, they've got to take 2 or 3 different buses, and sometimes the wait between is an hour, even 2 hours for these people. And if they have to go see an attorney or something like that, it's difficult for them to do that. So we need more transportation. One of the things that I've talked about is, instead of having one big bus, maybe we can invest in smaller buses and do more frequent trips. And so that would be one possibility that we're looking at.
And another issue regarding public transportation are the Bright Line trains, which have been rebranded Virgin Trains USA. There is a possibility we might get a stop in Cocoa. Although the company has said that they're going to do a ridership study, but they don't know yet. They haven't confirmed anything. Do you think that's going to happen?
My personal opinion?
Yeah.
That's what you're asking for. Okay. Yeah, my personal opinion is that I've had many meetings with the folks from Bright Line, which is now Virgin, and that just recently happened. And I was pretty confident that it would not happen. I knew that they had already started the trains down in South Florida, but I just didn't think it was going to happen in the middle of the state here. But now with that infusion of money from Richard Branson, it looks like it has a real possibility. So then the question becomes, if we're going to get a station, that's a big if. And I would say, if there's going to be a station, in my opinion, it likely would be at the Cocoa location, because for them to promise that they're going to get you from Miami to the Orlando airport in 3 hours, they can't be stopping 2 or 3 different times to get people on and off. So it would make sense that they're going to have one stop. And again, it may not be every trip. If they have 6 trips a day, it might only be 2 that stop at the station. But I would think it would make most sense, because they're going to slow down at that curve anyway. Slow down, make the stop, get people on board, drop people off, and then
Commissioner Smith, I'm so sorry to cut you off, but we got to go. Thank you so much
for
being here again.
That was a fast 26 minutes.
It was.
Very good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. That's it for Eye on Brevard today. You can rewatch all of our episodes on Florida Today's YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.